Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll go ahead and get started. I'll talk a little slow as people join in so that we don't rush into the good information. But my name is Travis Norvell. I'm Chief Strategy and Engagement Officer at Atlanta Public Schools, and I'll be introducing some of the team as we go deeper into goals and guardrails today. For those who have joined us in the past, this is our second community conversation on goals and guardrails. And so really looking forward to diving deeper into the equity guardrail. So our purpose for today is to build awareness on our progress towards goals and guardrails. So if you are unable or don't regularly tune into the board meetings on kind of first Mondays, then you may not hear about the progress or the work going on in our goals and guardrails. And so this is a way to dive a little deeper. It's also a way for the community to ask questions and share ideas on what we can do to better improve our focus. And I'll talk about goals and guardrails in a little while. Some logistics. We post a recording and presentation online. I'll put the main website on the chat, but I've already linked the presentation into the chat. The equity team has done a great job of embedding a bunch of links into that presentation, so you can always follow along and dive deeper into the resources. And then as a question pops up, or feedback pops up, please put it in the chat. We'll pause throughout the presentation to get feedback or questions. But as they come up, go ahead and put them in the chat because we can go ahead and start addressing them that way as well. And so at a high level, we have 4 goals and 4 guardrails. One way to think about it is the goals are student focused and the guardrails are the adult focused. If you know our mission statement, through a caring culture of equity, trust, and collaboration, every student will graduate ready for college, career, and life. That first half of it about the culture is the guardrails. And that second half about college, career, and life ready is about the goals. Last month, we talked about guardrail 2 and 3, stakeholder engagement and culture and climate. That was our first time talking about guardrails with the board and our first community conversation on it. Today, we're going to tackle guardrail number 1 on equity. And then for the next couple months in October and November, we jump back to the goals with a focus on literacy and numeracy. But this helps paint a picture of our goals and guardrails. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tim Gadsden. While Dr. Gadsden is new to this role, he is not new to APS. He was an associate superintendent for high schools here at Atlanta Public Schools, and has been all over the place: Wisconsin, Rhode Island, St. Croix, Texas, recently superintendent at Salt Lake City. We're excited to have him back, and he will be helping with some of our equity work in addition to the schools work. Some of the equity team as well will work under him. And so Dr. Gadsden will be available to kind of answer questions, but also may want to paint a picture of his vision or his next steps as it relates to equity. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Dr. Gadsden.
Thank you, Mr. Norvell. You will see here that Atlanta Public Schools aims to keep equity at the forefront of the work that we do. And that work is guided by our mission, our core values, strategic equity commitments, the guardrails, and board policy. And the goal of the work is to make sure that we are leading and doing this work with an equity mindset that positively impacts the lives of our students, our families, and the staff that we serve. And so there's been some talk about the work that has been done in the district, and we definitely want to continue that good work. We want to amplify and really brag and boast and share and make sure that all of our stakeholders know about the good and intentional, purposeful work that is taking place around equity and social justice. And while there have been some leadership changes and even some staff that have voluntarily left the district, we do have the equity division still intact, and we have some great people in the department that are continuing to do this work. And of course, we will bring other staff on in vacant positions. But this is a time for us to reset and really have a fresh start with our new interim superintendent a fresh start to this work. And as I said, really amplifying, communicating, and getting the word out about this work and making sure that we're very intentional about doing the work with our stakeholders, not to our stakeholders. And so that's where I am, and I look forward to entertaining any questions that you might have at the end of this presentation. So thank you, Mr. Norvell, and I'll turn it back over.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Gadsden. I appreciate your joining us this afternoon on day 4 or 5 or so. So I appreciate it. And with that, I'll pass it to Dr. O'Brien, who will kind of set the stage for what data has been used to measure the guardrail on equity.
Thank you, Mr. Novero. So Guardrail 1 again looks at equity, and this is where we're looking at where the superintendent will not allow an equitable treatment of students as measured by student academic outcomes, discipline occurrences, and/or resource allocation. As part of the student outcomes focused governance framework, guardrails envision or are the vision of the community. But the interim guardrails are really where we focus our attention at with progress monitoring. And so the guardrail 1.1 that you see here is our administration's best attempt to try to measure the guardrail 1, where we looked at the percentage of district divisions and schools aligning their efforts and resources with the APS strategic equity framework. And so there are 4 components or 4 strategies that comprise the equity strategic framework. As you can see from here, the first chart, we have equity strategy 1, which looks at promoting equity guided and data informed decision making. And this is measured through staff or schools' participation in the Otis Equity Index training. The second strategy, equity strategy 2, designing equitable systems, structures, and policy, is what you can see here in orange, which measures the percentage of divisions that have leveraged an equity impact assessment, equity decision-making tool, or a benefits and burdens analysis. Equity strategy 3, which is cultivating asset-based mindsets and a culture of belonging, really is measured and focused on staff participation in the spring 2022-2023 APS implicit bias training. And then lastly, the 4th strategy, equity strategy 4, is around centering stakeholder voice and inclusive stakeholder engagement. And so this is measured by the percentage of our schools who met their response rate target on 2 or more stakeholder groups on the APS Amped Up APS District-Wide Equity Survey pilot. With that, I will turn it over to Ms. Kennebrew to walk you through more details of each of our 4 strategies.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katisha Kennebrew, and I currently serve as Program Director for Equity Strategy. It's a pleasure to engage in today's conversation. We say equity is at the forefront of APS, so this slide will begin to share exactly what that means. We wanted to start with the board's definition for equity, and that is essentially a sense of being just and fair for all of our students and all of our stakeholders. We also wanted to highlight that equity has been added to the mission of Atlanta Public Schools. Equity also serves as one of the first guiding principles for the district, and it serves as one of the core values, which is equity at the forefront. On this slide, you'll also see a note about the board policy for equity, which was adopted in 2019. This was the foundation for creating the Center for Equity and Social Justice. It also aligned our work with the equity commitments, the 11 equity commitments that you see here that are outlined in our strategic plan from 2020 to 2025. And the Otis Equity Indexes, which help us to measure our progress against those equity commitments. You'll see here a glimpse of our strategic equity framework, which outlines tools that we share across the district, many of which Monique just described that we'll dive deep into today. You'll see that this is what guides our guardrail focused on equity. You'll hear about our equity impact assessments, which allow us to take a disciplined view at major decisions that the district makes and ensure that we're considering equity impacts. Our work is guided by supplier diversity initiatives, as well as initiatives that engage our partners through THEO, which is Together in Hope, Equity, and Opportunity. THEO partners provided a number of high priority needs that our school leaders and teachers and school-based staff identified. You'll see here equity dispositions that we use to share with not only new staff, but existing staff to reinforce the priorities of being an equity leader, as well as an equity teacher. You'll see here our T's. We invite the community to have Talking Equity Atlanta or to join us for tea so that we can unpack many of the efforts that the district has taken on to advance educational equity. You'll also see Brave Conversations, which is a hotly requested professional learning, equity-focused professional learning opportunity that our district leads, in addition to the AMP Up APS district-wide survey, which we were happy to pilot in the district. And you'll also see a nod here to our equity champions, which we celebrate in our schools, work that's happening day in and day out that we celebrate, and we also invest Title II dollars that allow them to continue their equity-focused professional learning. And you'll see in the corner here our Equity at the Forefront magazine, which keeps us all abreast of the latest and greatest equity efforts that are happening across the district, including opportunities for us to engage with our school leaders around guidelines and guidance for navigating legislation that impacts equity in the classroom. So this is a lot. We wanted to just take you on a tour of all the different ways and resources that our team has been really working hard to make equity come alive and become actionable in the district. And now we'll dive into a few of these at a closer detail. Equity Strategy 1 allows us to be able to measure our equity commitments. Otis Equity Index, what are these? These are essentially a reflection of a cross-functional action team that has allowed us to take a look very closely at those factors that really help us to measure our progress against advancing equity in Atlanta. Otis stands for Opportunity, Tangible, Intangible, and System Equity Indexes. Summarized here, you'll see that opportunity allows us to look at the neighborhoods in which our schools sit and the communities that shape our students' learning experiences. Tangibles focuses on the instructional program and practices that influence students' academic outcomes. Intangibles allows us to look at the whole child, and System Index allows us to look at the district and identify where resource allocation can be adjusted to ensure that we are providing the supports that our students and our staff need. We are so pleased that with launching Otis this summer, 87% of our schools had a chance to participate in the training that was provided. And we also have links here that give you a high-level, quick overview, video overview of Otis, as well as some of the highlights from that training. We're so proud that 2 of our Frederick Douglass Astros helped us as students who aspire to be in the film and production industry. They helped us to create this video to show that we really are making equity real, not just with our adults, but also with our students. On the next view, you'll see what it looks like to examine each equity commitment in a map, as well as the specific measures. This illustrates that for each equity commitment within Otis, we have a system level view where each dot represents a school, Each equity commitment has several measures that the cross-functional action team collaborated to produce a score that will allow us for orange dots to see when the school is performing below the district's average, and blue dots, which highlight schools that we may want to learn from because they demonstrate where the averages rise above the district average. These are school leaders that we hope to learn best practices and begin to replicate and scale across the district. One 100% of our schools have access to these data, and in the coming year, we hope to understand ways to enhance these data. And the view that you see here allow that principal to have a one-page, one-stop shop snapshot of the tangible and intangible equity commitments, so that as they make plans for continuous school improvement, as they think about investments, as they think about support needs from the central office, these allow them to highlight areas of investment. So here you'll see the blue areas are areas of equity commitments that this particular school has risen above the district average. And you'll see two orange areas, which identify areas that may be worth exploring potential supports. And so for Otis, the equity score would be an 8, because 8 of the 10 equity commitments are above the district average. These are data that we find allow us as a district to not just have the equity commitments on paper, but to really begin to peel back which measures allow us to be able to examine where supports can be used in schools to help ensure that the learning experiences for all students are strong. We hope to use these types of data in addition to other data to pilot with 10, at least 10 targeted schools, to ensure that we can provide coaching as well as additional supports to partner with them in identifying an equity commitment that they would love to work with us on to improve in their schools. And I'll pause here just to invite Shatina Love, who's our Executive Director for Equitable Learning Environments, if you'd like to chime in here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katisha. So again, I'm Shatina Love, the Executive Director for Equitable Learning Environments, and I will be supporting this particular strategy and this work in the expansion of our Leading Equitable Schools program. As Katisha stated, we have targeted and anticipated additional 8 schools to expand our program to at least 11, so 10 plus schools, 11 schools, and we will utilize our Otis Index as our key performance indicator to measure the impact of that equity coaching for those leaders and how shifts are made within their building based on that coaching. We work with our partner, the Teaching and Learning group to help, the Learning Administration to help grow those leaders' equity lens, review their resources and how they are impacting students.
And Travis, I think we'll pause here. I see a couple of questions.
Yeah, let's, so for those who just joined, we have the presentation in the chat, and you can also ask questions in the chat, but you can also jump off. We'll pause after each equity strategy. So I saw Ms. Alderi's hand up and then Ms. House, so we'll start with you, Ms. Alderi. Can you jump off mute?
Hi, thank you, and I apologize. I am driving. I just wanted, is the first equity strategy the Otis index? Is that what we're talking about now, or were we just given a review of everything and now we're talking about the learning strategy? So my question is, because she went over Otis and AMP Up, and I have a question about both. So should I address those now, I guess is my question.
We're happy to take your question. We were reviewing the equity strategy 1, which does focus in on Otis Equity Index, but we're happy to entertain your question.
Okay, and then is AMP Up later? Is that?
It is.
Correct?
It is.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll just ask the Otis one now. So we've heard about Otis for years now. And did I understand it correctly that you mentioned that it was just rolled out this summer?
Yes, we had a cross-functional action team that spent the better part of last year. We collaborated not only with school leaders, we collaborated with principal advisory, student advisory, the research and evaluation team, and each division that has data connected to each of these equity commitments to ensure that we were refining and cleaning and making sure that the data that are presented are as accurate as possible to reflect the core of each equity commitment. So you're absolutely right.
Okay.
We're intentional about year one, and year two allowed us to develop and to partner with Hanover Research, which is a company that allows us to not only look at internally these measures, but to also look at benchmark measures that will allow us to say, are there areas that we can learn from other school districts in each of these equity commitments? So you're right, we have spent the past 2 years refining, and we launched in June at the Summer Leadership Retreat with our principals to ensure that we were refining and building something solid that could help us to measure our equity commitments moving forward.
Okay, and then so that and I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly, because I've been hearing about it through 2 years through different meetings, but that was a great short summary. So I guess the question is we are hearing a lot from teachers that they keep getting a lot of things and a lot of meetings and a lot of things to do, and even additional meetings from the district and from their principals being pulled out of the classroom outside of their PL time, which is learning time, to learn all these new individual Otis and different platforms and the 10 schools. How do we protect the learning time in the classroom so that these initiatives, although incorporated, aren't too much? Like, how do we balance all of that? And how are you guys being thoughtful about that now in this new journey, new since September 1st? What is there, are we relooking at that?
So
Or how are we going to relook at that?
yeah, so I can answer that question. And so what we have done with our pilot schools, which were Fickett, Bolton, and Toomer, we were intentional about looking at the dates and trying to identify the least impactful times for those leaders in the buildings. And we'll take that information going forward as we have identified and anticipated additional schools. But as we have those dates clarified, we will make sure to our best ability that it does not impact school learning or instruction, or impacts it as minimally as possible. And I'll also say that those teams that are a part of the school level leadership teams for the Leading Equitable Schools are mostly administrators within the building or leaders within the buildings. And so not many teachers are impacted. However, they are welcome to participate at the principal's discretion.
Okay, and then the principals and administrators are then rolling it out to the teachers?
So they are working with their core teams, whomever they identify as about 4 to 5 leaders within their building. It may be teacher leaders, it may be other administrators in their buildings or other leaders in their buildings, to ensure that that work continues throughout. They're looking at the data. They're doing empathy walks with each other as they follow students or work with students to support them and understand the challenges that they have. And they're making decisions around the resources that they have available at their level to ensure that they are making equitable decisions.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Before I go to Ms. Howe, and then I'll also chime in just from a district level. I believe you heard Dr. Gadsden at the board meeting talk about there's a lot of stuff, a lot of initiatives, a lot of work happening that needs to be reviewed and see the impact on teachers in the classroom. And Dr. Battle mentioned the exact same thing in her remarks when she was sworn in about the intense focus on literacy among a few other kind of areas. So be on the lookout for more information on how that is being cascaded across the district. With that,
and is there a dashboard? Is there a dashboard we can find all of these reports on that's readily available?
So I'm happy to chime in there. Our initial rollout is to our school leaders and their teams who they have identified to review the data. We are currently exploring with new administration as well as with our research and evaluation team on what the external view of this data looks like at the system level and at the school level. So stay tuned, but we are having those conversations around how to ensure that we first support and fully ensure implementation in our schools, and then consider what the rollout looks like for public engagement.
Thanks, Katisha. Ms. Howe, and then we'll jump to strategy 2. And then reminder for everybody, feel free to put questions in the chat as well. Ms. Howe.
Hey, Travis, how you doing? Hey, y'all. Quick question. Do y'all have anybody on here from the special education department? Because my question will be there. How are you guys looking to make that equitable for the special needs children or program?
I'm happy to take a stab. Unfortunately, I don't see, I'm trying to look, and Travis definitely helped me to see if there are any representatives from special education. But what I can say, Ms. Howe, is that one of the equity commitments here is the second one on the left, is supporting special populations. These equity commitments existed in our strategic plan actually before the launch of the Center for Equity and Social Justice. And one of the main subgroups of students that's called out there, which we will have data that aligns with, are our special needs students. And so what we do is we hope to continue collaborating with special education to understand how to best support not only our students who are special needs, but you'll also see groups of students there, such as English language learners, as well as students from socioeconomically disadvantaged households. So special needs students are a priority, specifically called out in that equity commitment.
Now let me ask
Here, Chelsea is on the line, the assistant superintendent.
Awesome.
Hi, yes, good afternoon. I'm actually out today, but this was a really important conversation, so I did not want to miss it, but that is why my camera is not on. Yes, so we're doing quite a bit of work. We actually just had a meeting in addition this morning because GNETS is no longer going to be a state program for our students struggling with significant behavior and have a lot of therapeutic and emotional needs. So yes, we're working very closely with equity on several different things. That's just one that we're just working on this morning. So we are trying to be intentional. We welcome any feedback, of course. But yes, we are looking at lots of different equitable services and looking at our least restrictive environment continuums and several things for our students with disabilities.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chelsea. Do y'all guys have any data that y'all can drop in the chat that we can look at that the equity department have collected and did some research on the last few years about just the special needs population in general? Do y'all have any of that data, or are y'all still collecting data?
We're happy to share any specifically. What would you like to see?
I would just like to see an overall report that has been done for the special education department in general, because that has been a huge struggle. And as we've seen at the board meeting, there's some push to get other types of special education programming in Atlanta Public School, kind of insisting on that what we have is not working. So I know we have the equity department. So I guess my question is, what data that we have that show what we've been doing have been working or may not been working, and we might need to look at something else, because we all know that population always kind of left out, and we want to make sure this year, and I know Ms. Battle have that top of mind of making sure those babies get lifted up while we continue to lift up the children that's already up.
Yes, ma'am. We actually are currently preparing a upcoming board presentation, probably in the next 2 months. I know Dr. Battle has committed to that, that has an overview of everything we have done in special ed, are doing, and what is coming. But we're taking a really hard look at lots of our programs right now. So we will have that board presentation. If there's something specific you would like us to pull for you, I'm more than happy to, but you can look for that upcoming presentation as well.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Ms.
Yes,
Howe.
I'll stick my email in the chat too, just in case you want to email me with any specific questions. I'm happy to chat.
Perfect, thank you. And then as we go to strategy 2, just to add on to Chelsea's stuff, I'll look for last year's board presentation from special education, just so you can see the data from last year, and I'll put that in the chat. And then also special education is finalizing their engagements for the year, their special education advisory committee, their parent cafes, listening sessions, things like that. I believe it's this week is when some of that will be finalized, and you should see all of that on the district calendar once we get on the Zoom links.
Travis, can I ask you something on that note? Have they hired another coordinator to fill the role of Miss Edith Abakari? Because she was a really big
I
advocate.
don't believe so, but I'll have Chelsea chime in the chat or jump off. But I don't believe they've filled Miss Edith's role yet. Chelsea?
I don't actually know who that is. I'm going on a year, but I will definitely ask and find out.
It hasn't been filled yet. This is Keisha. It hasn't been filled yet.
Okay. We'll get with you, Chelsea. All
Okay.
right, pass it back to Shatina and Katisha to move through strategy 2.
Absolutely. Thank you. So equity strategy number 2, designing equitable systems, structures, and policies. So we have adopted or developed 3 different tools to help support this strategy. The first being the equity impact assessment, the second being the equity decision-making tool, and the last is the benefits and burden analysis. And so of our divisions that have taken advantage of this, 56 or 5 in total. And what happens, the process is they bring their strategic projects for the year. The executive team looks at those projects and identifies or prioritizes those projects. And then from there, they go to an intake process with our internal team, our equitable resource and strategies team, on which we have Dr. Karina Wyndham with us to be able to support. And those, after they prioritize and identify through the intake process, the team takes that information and we go through a process of identifying, engaging the community on the decisions that need to be made, taking in stakeholder feedback, and then presenting the information to those teams. We are not responsible for making a final decision. We are only responsible for research and fact finding and presenting that information. And so of those 9 that were prioritized, 6 of those were completed this year. And at the bottom of the screen, you will see we had 3 EAIs in those projects of scope. You will see to the side, nutrition department, feasibility study, the math textbook adoption, and then Tapestry's charter petition. Then we had 2 EDMTs, the assistant band director stipends, and our student of employee transfer options. And then we had 1 BBA, which was our North Atlanta High School new stadium expansion. We do also have 3 remaining projects that are still in progress. And on this page, again, we have 56% of our divisions that completed, that participated in this process. You'll see an example of one of those projects that were evaluated. Karina, would you like to share a little about this particular project?
My pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone. So for the nutrition feasibility study, the purpose was to determine exactly what model that we would be using moving forward based off of the feedback from the community that a change needed to be made. And so while initially it started off as an using the equity decision-making tool, which was a more informal process, we realized that based on the criteria that we established for the equity impact assessment, that this was, it needed to be escalated essentially. And so we were integral throughout the process to collect data from throughout the district and also from our stakeholders to figure out exactly what we needed to do. And so at this point, we're in the process of making sure that the nutrition is now in-house, and we are in the last phase of the equity impact assessment now that the decision has been made, which is progress monitoring and continued development.
Travis, are there any questions?
There? Yes, Dion.
Hi, yes. So I actually sat in and was one of three non-employee stakeholders that participated in one of the nutrition feedback sessions with a consulting group in the spring. Heard about this nutrition feasibility study casually mentioned in the spring at a board meeting. But yet there's been very little communication, of which we've been struggling with nutrition for over a decade. With all of that said, as someone who participated with this consulting group, we were told we were going to get feedback. Where is the public engagement and process? And again, let's say nutrition as an example, but where will we find all of these reports that you mentioned? Where are the links to the reports, the EIEs and the various reports in the last slides, so that we don't have to do open records requests to get them?
So we do have those, and they have been, Dr. Battle has requested that we post those. We are in the process of ensuring that we follow our internal mechanisms and ensuring that our hierarchy, our processes are followed. And so those will be made available shortly.
Okay, so they haven't been made available up until before Dr. Battle, is that correct?
Karina, can you support me on that one? I'm not sure.
Sure. So at this point, because the decisions were in the process of being made, it's kind of an ongoing process. So the final reports are supplied to senior cabinet, and then from there, they're able to make the decisions or use it as they embark on that process. So to answer your question, they are available, but we just have not updated our website at this point. And so I think there was a couple of different avenues that we needed to address first and foremost before we release that. Does that answer the question?
Okay. Yes, I think the challenging part is when you guys release decisions that reference reports and stakeholders haven't had an opportunity to review those reports. So then we can't engage or understand. So a suggestion would be maybe making that stuff available so people can process it and understand a little bit where your recommendations are coming from. An example is the tapestry information that came out in the board report. The EIE was not attached to that, but yet it was referenced in that report. That was also done in the VHE and 4-5 decision with the Inman property. An EIE was alluded to and records requests had to be done. And there was a wealth of information there that should have been shared with the public. We are a charter system. So I would just recommend that is done in a more proactive way in the future so people can understand decision-making or other perspectives or all of the hard work that went into your decision-making.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. That's a wonderful suggestion.
Yes, definitely received. And I do know that we are in the process of, again, continuing to develop that infrastructure, but member checking is very important. We're asking for your feedback, and we do want to make sure that we reflect it, that what we have received is what you intended. So thank you for that. Received.
Thanks. Also, I inadvertently skipped a question in the chat. I believe this was tied to a previous statement that either Katisha or Shatina made about schools and principals, administrations kind of creating teams or volunteering. The question, and correct me, Walker family, if there's more details, why is the involvement given at the administration's discretion? That in and of itself is inequitable and limits engagement. I'm not sure if you could talk more about that.
Katisha, you want it? You and me?
Sure, I'm happy to chime in. I know that, and I want to make sure that I do fully understand the question. So if there is more context, Walker family, please do chime in. If it is around our pilot of identifying schools that demonstrate a readiness to work in the Leading Equitable Schools program and have that coaching and supports, I do feel like one important step that we do try to make intentional is having conversations with associate superintendents and principals and others to really understand, given other priorities that sit on principals' plates and others' plates, that we are being as strategic as possible in understanding what the capacity and the load is for new projects. And so when we When we share pilots of 10 or more schools, what we're trying to do is understand where that readiness may already exist, but then not to stop there, but to learn from pilot and then understand what does it mean to differentiate and then ultimately scale. It's not an intention at all to be inequitable. We define equity as providing different supports based on specific needs. And so when we do try to make sure that we are starting small before we scale, that really is the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish, is to really understand and assess what those needs are before we do involve others at scale. But I'm not sure. I do want to make sure that we can check in to see if that was the spirit of your question and if we've answered it fully.
I'd like to add, I did see it come up, and it was in relations to teachers being a part of those equity teams at the school levels. And so we would definitely have to lean on the building leaders to identify the staff members that have the capacity to be able to support those decisions. And so do they have a particular process for that? Not at this time, but I will take note to see if we need to review and give suggestions on how to select those team members. But to someone else's point earlier, we would want building leaders to look at the disruption or possible disruption to instructional time. We would want to look at the supports that individual teachers need, and again, their capacity to be able to take on this additional, to support this equity mindset and to do this work. We don't want it to be said or be seen as something additional, because this equity is at the front of what we do and should inform all of our decisions. But we also want to make sure that our teachers and also our building leaders are of the skill set or developing skill set or desire and capacity to lead and support the work.
Awesome. Thanks, Shatina. Let's do Ms. Howe real quick, and then we'll jump in because we have 2 more strategies to get to. And I know Dion's already holding a question for AMP Up, so I want to make sure we get over there. Ms. Howe.
Yes, I have a really great suggestion for you guys. Can you guys, and I see my favorite person on here, Diane Jacoby, she will tell you I'm in absolutely every one of her meetings, but can you guys this year lean to push some of that information to the Go team so that the Go team can push that information to the community members and the parents to share, so that when Miss Dion come and she said, we don't get this and be able to digest it. But if our Go team members, because we do have parent seats and community seats and swing seats, even student seats, if we can get a lot of this information in the school, because I know how that is, tasking somebody to do it, they got all this other stuff to do. But if we can make sure this on the agenda to talk about that this is coming out in the pipeline, or this is something that need to be shared to the community, that way that's a great opportunity to get the communication out.
Great.
Yes. Thank you. That's received.
Also, before I pass it to Shatina, just want to say welcome to board members Howard and Jones. I see y'all joined, and apologies for not welcoming you earlier this afternoon. And so, Shatina.
Absolutely. So now we'll move into equity strategy 3, cultivating asset-based mindsets, a culture of belonging. We do know that before we make decisions, we have to work or change policies. We have to work intentionally on the mindsets around equity. Part of that work was birthed this year, or at the end of spring, in the spring of last year, through our Implicit Bias 101 training. That is an asynchronous training that started out that's self-paced and interactive. We had glowing reviews for the participation for those that did participate with this self-paced opportunity. That we had a total of 45% of our staff members to participate. That started out mandatory, but it was moved to being voluntary after looking at the demands that leaders and staff members were under in the spring of last year. And so we look to continue. That is an opportunity that continues to be open and available to all of our staff members. Again, last year we had 45% of our staff members to participate and complete the training. Additionally, we had 88% of our cabinet leaders to participate in the training. And then we had 100% of our board members participate in a training on implicit bias, not necessarily this particular one, but we did have an intentional specific training for them. And then I want to also uplift that that's not the only way that we engage mindsets and attempt to share information when it comes to mindsets and what's happening with our leaders. We have multiple other trainings that we've offered. Katisha lifted up some of them, including our Brave Spaces conversation, our leader, school leader, teacher, and also system leader dispositions. We also have equity champions in many of our schools, which are supported by Title II funding to help them continue their professional development and professional learning around making equitable decisions and bringing that information back to their schools. And you'll see again at the bottom, there are multiple other spaces that we lean into providing the opportunity to cultivate mindsets. Katisha will talk in a moment about our AMP Up APS that again attempts to get to the bottom of or get to the foundation of how our students are engaged so that we can take that information back and use that to help inform our decisions, but also inform the trainings that we have around mindsets. Are there, and I've kind of rushed through that, but I'm conscious of time, so I want to make sure that we get questions in. Are there any questions in the chat around our implicit bias trainings or our equity strategy 3?
Sure, there's a question slash feedback, and actually I think Katisha probably has done some of this for the AMP Up, but can we incentivize completing the trainings, give a stipend to staff that completes the professional learning?
That's a great suggestion. We will take that to our leadership team for further discussion.
Yep. Let's see, all right.
So we'll move on to equity strategy 4, but I will just anchor our equity strategy 4 really came out of an understanding of equity-focused professional learning. I'll share survey summary results with you, but one of the connected to the other strategy, one of the main bright spots and growth areas that we learned from our AMP Up APS data, specifically from our school-based staff, was a desire for professional learning. So we know we're talking about our equity strategies in 1, 2, 3, 4 lanes, but I do want to just illustrate that this is data that we did hear directly from our school leaders, as well as our district leaders, around a desire and need for more focused, equity-focused professional learning. And so this is one of the actionable ways that we are utilizing survey results, like the results we received from AMP Up, to inform and guide our practice. I will just start here. Our AMP Up APS district-wide equity survey was launched as a pilot last year. Several of you probably had an opportunity to participate in it. We were thrilled to be able to present this survey not only to our students and our teachers, but also to our families. And I know I saw Keisha Copeland on. It's my understanding that this was one of the first times that the district has been able to really push out in a systemic way an opportunity to hear from all clusters, from our families in all clusters. We had very ambitious target responses rates for this year's pilot. But we know that this is a chance for us to also learn. We had 70% for both students and teachers as a target, and we had 20% for our families. And you'll see, while we heard from 15,000 plus survey respondents, we know that we fell a bit short of our target, but that just assures us that we did have big, ambitious goals, because we do really want to amplify the voices of as many stakeholders as possible. So that represents a growth area for us for sure, as we consider ways to continue to center our student voices, but also amplify the voices of our additional stakeholders. You'll see the big number here, 30%. That reflects the percentage of our schools that either met or exceeded their response rate target for at least 2 or more stakeholder groups. And that was phenomenal. Panorama Education is the organization that powered our survey. And even they commented to us that they hadn't seen a pilot that garnered that level of commitment in a long time. So we were really proud of that. On the picture, you'll see a summary snapshot of what we learned. I'll go into detail on the next slide, but what we're also leaning into here is this was the first time that as a district, we were able to really hear candid comments around what students need to enhance their learning experience. We were able to hear to the degree that students felt included and like they belonged in school. From our parents, we were able to in our families, we were able to hear suggestions. Many of the suggestions like you're sharing now, we were able to hear those so that we can again tailor our practice. You'll see here at the bottom of this slide, a host of ways in which we not only connected with district and school-based leaders to shape what our AMP Up APS survey would look like, the content, the questions, the rollout, but also how we shared results. We didn't want to do a survey and let the survey information not be put into practice. So you'll see a range from not only the superintendent and senior cabinet officers, but associate students, principals, assistant principals. You'll see students, you'll see charter partner school leaders, you'll see expanded cabinet where we had a chance to unpack the data at a table with students to hear directly from them how they interpret the data and how additional ways that we can help support them that we were learning, as well as our advisory councils for not only principals and teachers and students, but the public. We shared this. This is actually a snapshot of the data summary that was included in our Equity at the Forefront magazine, which we push out via our website as well as push out through strategic ways. And so we're going to continue to make sure that we get the word out, especially as we learn from this pilot to inform what future may look like. And then very quickly on the next slide here, you'll see some of the results. We wanted to make sure that we listen to not only the glowing things, but also the areas that really highlight places for growth. And so you'll see a couple of bright spots that are summarized here. We were so pleased, and we shared this information with our school teachers as well as the leaders, that 72% of the students that were surveyed shared that they feel confident that their teachers really want them to succeed. This was incredibly important for us because when we first launched the Center for Equity and Social Justice, we conducted an equity audit, and that audit really forced us to look at student connections as well as high expectations across the district. And so this allowed us to understand those students that felt this, but also to look at the students, and that is 72% of the respondents. This was a pilot. So our students who responded in this survey were our secondary level students. We surveyed 6th through 12th grade, and we had just over 8,600 responses that came in. We also learned from our teachers that 85% of them reported feeling comfortable about incorporating new materials about different cultures and backgrounds into the curriculum. What we also heard, which is not here, is that they need more help. They need, and you'll see at the bottom, 40% of the teachers reported that professional development opportunities help them to explore new ways to promote equity and inclusion in their practices. But that also lets us know that 60% of our teachers are needing more of that equity-focused professional development. So this gives you a snapshot of some of what we learned, both in the glowing areas as well as in the growth areas. And we're happy to share. There's a link here on the slide that's been shared that shows the equity summary results from our pilot. And we're happy to have a Talking Equity Atlanta series to unpack that, that information in more detail. And so I'm going to go through just one more and then we'll pause because I do see a question in the chat, but we didn't want to miss an opportunity to share how this data was being used. So we have a couple of data use case spotlights. We had so many to choose from, but we wanted to at least share on today's call. From Dr. Betsy Bachman at Midtown, she used the AMP Up APS data to engage diverse 12th graders. She wanted to hear about the arc of their experience from elementary up through high school and what barriers stand in the way, particularly for her Black and Brown students who were interested in taking advanced placement courses, but maybe had myths or other barriers that got in the way. On the others, another one that we wanted to highlight today was Dr. Dancer, he's the principal at Maynard Jackson High School. He used his AMP Up APS data and his student table talk to really focus in on chronically absent students. What are some of the underlying reasons that they miss school? What supports do they need? So we wanted to provide some real examples of, we're not just asking to ask, we're not just collecting data to collect. We really are hoping to use these data to help illuminate some of the specific needs and some of the differentiated needs that our students have, and then our staff and then our families have, to really change our practices to make sure that we're being of greater support to all those stakeholders. And you'll see finally there, our team, we poured over the data to ensure that we were looking at what were some of those professional learning needs so that we can shape opportunities that we are providing, so that we are truly addressing the equity challenges that are bubbling up for many of our staff. So I'll pause there. Travis, I think we do have a couple of questions before we just recap. So I'm happy to take those at this time.
Yeah, I'll pass it to Dion, but you did put some questions in the chat. One that was a bridge from the last strategy to this strategy too. But basically, are there trends you're seeing from clusters or schools for either participating in this equity work, how they're responding? Do we do anything with that information? Any of those pieces?
Happy to give one clear example. We heard from a number of our middle school students, which we were thoroughly excited about. We celebrated those principals and those school leaders that really did amp up and amplify the voices. We know that we want to hear more from our high school students. High school and middle school were the secondary grade level students that participated in the pilot. So what I will say is, across grade levels, we are noticing some trends. We are also seeing that there are different needs across clusters. So we know that there's some areas that reach out to us directly because they do want that equity-focused professional learning. We also understand that our families showed up differently. And I don't want to necessarily speak completely for Keisha, but we know that there's some families that we hear from more than others. And so what that allows us to do is to understand, well, how can we get these types of amplifying voice opportunities in different channels and formats to be able to hear more clearly from all of our families. So those are just a couple of examples, but we're happy to share a few more across cluster, as well as across different schools that we're noticing.
Awesome. Thanks, Katisha. Dion, did you have another question you want to share?
Yes, I think when this data, well, I will say when a couple slides of this data was presented, and I hope even with this, you provide the information for all schools and be more transparent about the data. I think it can show different pictures when you look at it. If I remember correctly, it seemed like my children's middle school was overwhelmingly responsive, but then saying that 72% of the people who are surveyed say X or say Y is really not an accurate reflection, right? We need to own the data, and where if there's more groups saying something, or if it's coming more out of one school or one cluster, overwhelming statements need to be careful. We need to be careful with those broad statements, because as you just said, there are so many different pockets. And I hope the data is a little bit more transparent. You guys have, and some of this is overlapping with other surveys the kids and the staff is doing. It's survey overload, it's testing overload, it's professional learning overload. I understand what you're saying about professional learning, but you can see in other surveys where teachers are saying it's too much and all the professional learning time is being monopolized and taken, that they can't do what's already on their plate. So the whole picture, I think, is really important. So with all of that said, who designs these surveys? Who picks the questions? And also, why are we now doing it twice and adding this on to students an additional time this year? What was the thought rationale behind that?
So I'm happy to answer your question around survey content, survey design. We partner with Panorama Education as well as a cross-functional team, again, that helps us to reflect across what we want to hear. AMP Up not only served our curiosities around belonging and inclusion and equity. We also had profile of a graduate questions there. We also had family engagement. And so each team looked at what we already ask, what we don't ask, and where are the gaps, as well as what we're hearing when we do know that there are some surveys that we complete as a district, but the data doesn't necessarily come back to us in an actionable format with a quick enough turnaround for us to be able to take action. And so we hear you loud and clear. I know we traded emails earlier, I believe earlier, couple of weeks ago, Dion, and you're absolutely right. What we're having to do is to understand the data that we do need in order to improve the learning experiences for our students, as well as the support needs, and be able to address those. And we are, as a district, I know I see a couple of colleagues on who lead a assessment task force, where we are listening to and inventorying what are those surveys, which ones give us really actionable information in a timely manner, which ones do we just have to do because we have to do them, and then which ones do we really need to be more precise around so that we can really make the improvement that we know is possible, but that's also needed and deserved by our students. And so you're right, it is a balancing act, and it's not lost on us that we have to do this part right, but we also have some cross-functional supports in place to understand and to reimagine what could it look like for a survey opportunity to be an SEL activity or a social studies classroom conversation. And so we are exploring those types of innovative ways to still get the information that we need to report it accurately and transparently. And we'll be sure to share the ways that you can continue to access more details as needed. But we are really grappling with what you raised. And so I appreciate you raising it here for this group, so that we can continue that exercise of how do we make sure that we streamline these types of needed exercises that allow us to amplify voice, but how can we do it in a manner that allows us to minimize what you described as fatigue that some of our stakeholders do face. So thank you for the question.
I think we need to focus on just ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. I appreciate you saying this being pushed into classrooms, but it already is. I mean, they're doing surveys constantly in classes and aren't being taught. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of our academic data. And can you answer the last part of the question? Why is this now going to be given twice as a mandatory survey?
So
this year?
I can jump in. So currently we are, because that folds into our work around balance, what we call balanced assessment, and we include surveys in that because, again, there are some similarities between surveys and assessments. They're not the same, but there is some definite parallels there. And so we are working on inventorying, cross-referencing to make sure we can reduce redundancy and ultimately reduce any impact on instructional time, or, as you said, professional learning time that teachers may need. And we are intentional about that work. We have a team that represents departments and divisions across the central office, but also a lot of representation from the schools themselves at the principal level. And those very issues that you have raised have been raised by schools themselves and students themselves. And we're currently finding ways, how can we get that information, but in a way that does not impact instructional time. So we have not fully formulated a plan for how we're going to roll out AMP Up currently. But we are working on that, and we want to gather as much input as possible to come up with the best plan, as you said, to get accurate information that's actionable in real time, during the school year, to provide that benefit to students and to teachers. And again, make sure that it is, again, real time. And find creative ways of, if we do have to do surveys and capture student voice, being very intentional about communicating the nature and purpose of what we're trying to accomplish and how it's going to benefit students. And again,
so I agree with Dion, and that will be some of our work. Looking at the surveys that we administer to students, looking at where we might be able to gather some of this information from other surveys that we are already administering, also looking at how we are able to strategically insert equity-based questions into other surveys so that we're capturing this data and reducing the number of surveys that are out there. Because, as a researcher myself, survey fatigue plays into not only the number of responses that we get, but also the quality of the responses that we get. So that is definitely something that we've got to visit for our students, our staff, and our parents, looking at how many times, how many surveys we administer, and how can we gather better information with fewer surveys. Because we do want to amplify the voices of all of our stakeholders. And we do want our parents and our students to feel like they're active partners with us in this. But are we gathering that input in the best way?
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Getson. And
thank you. I appreciate that. At the end of this as kids, and I know my middle school son had some feedback on all these surveys and tests, and I appreciate that you guys just continue to look at this through the lens of that there are children at this with tests and questions and district tests and district surveys when they're just trying to balance everything else, just how to learn 5 times 5. So I appreciate you're looking at this with a new lens. Thank you.
Thanks, Deanne. One more question, then I'll wrap it up. Thanks for those of you who are giving us more time than we requested. Sherry.
Yes, I wanted to know the equity department. Are you guys using partners to help create the department? Or any partners funding this department to help create it?
I'm happy to answer that question. You're absolutely right, Sherry. We do rely on generous partners. It's my understanding that several partners, I don't want to name them all, but there is a very special partner who we do know was instrumental in helping us to get off the ground and is still a current investor in equity in Atlanta Public Schools. And that's the Annie E. Casey Foundation, the Atlanta Civic Site. And there are others. There are tons of others, but that's one that we hold close.
Okay, we need to look into some of these partners that are donors to the equity department, just to ensure that they're doing ethical work by APS children, because I notice equity is a big word in Atlanta now. And we, just to be transparent, people who give money are given money for certain things. So, we might also need to look at partners. Are they working equitable and ethically to serve all children? So that's just something to throw out there for you guys to look at.
Greatly appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Ms. Balil. And then there's a follow-up from Dion in the chat that we'll have to work on, which is the list of partners to the equity department and kind of data agreements or sharing agreements, if there are any, with those. So I first want to thank all of y'all for attending, for the equity team, Dr. Gadsden, everybody else from APS who joined on, because with these conversations, you never know which direction they're going to go, because as equity is in everything is available and on the table. And so appreciate everyone giving some time to answer some questions from the community and get some really great feedback. I'm going to just do some high level. I like to kind of recap stuff before we leave, and then what to see going next. We've heard some great feedback and questions, everything from survey fatigue, protecting learning time, public access to data and dashboards, specific emphasis on special education, as well as how individual schools and clusters, what the trends are, what the requirements are, where there is flexibility from the administration or not of a school to leverage. Some great ideas on pushing information to go teams and incentivizing people to participate in professional learning and our surveys, and then just getting a fuller picture of what the data is showing. There was a lot more in the chat, but I appreciate kind of some of these themes that kind of crossed everybody's comments. Coming up, there's always some good engagement. Last night, thanks to those who came up to the Washington cluster to hear from Chief Applin on safety and security, which was a topic that is raised a number of times in these engagements. He'll be back out, I believe, at Sutton Northside campus. For North Atlanta tonight, this weekend is the 5K. I hope to see all y'all running there with your sneakers on. And then we've got District 2 and District 6 community meetings for the board coming up on the 12th and 19th. Everything is on the APS calendar, so you can engage in any number of topics that you want. So I appreciate everyone's time. You all know how to reach out if you have additional questions or feedback, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks. Bye, y'all.